Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar sponsored by the Children's Safety Network. Our topic today is keeping children ages 8 through 14 safe as motor vehicle occupants. I'm Cindy Rogers, and I'm the moderator for our program. We're very fortunate to have three terrific presenters with us today, but before I introduce them, I'm going to ask my colleague Becky Wilmer to provide a few technical tips. Becky?
All right, thanks, Cindy. So currently, audio is being broadcast through your computer speakers. And the quality of the audio depends on the speed of your internet connection. So if the audio is choppy, please find a more stable internet connection or listen over the phone by dialing 866-835-7973. If you are listening through the phone, please mute your computer speakers to eliminate any echo. Phone lines will be muted during the presentation to eliminate background noise. If you're hearing an echo right now, you might have the webinar room open in multiple windows on your computer. So if that's the case, just make sure that you only have it open in one, and that should eliminate that echo. We have answers to frequently asked questions in the webinar instructions pod that's in the upper left. And if you have questions or technical issues, you can type them into the chat box on the left at any time. After the presentation, we will pause for the presenters to answer your questions. We also have a PDF of the slides available to download right above the slide deck. And to download that, you can click on PDF of the slides and then select the Download Files button to save the document to your computer. The webinar will be recorded and the archive will be sent out to all registrants within 2 weeks. All right, back to you, Cindy.
Thanks so much, Becky. So I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. Lorrie Walker is the Child Passenger Safety Technical Advisory and Training Manager for Safe Kids Worldwide. In this role, she develops community-based educational programs on vehicle safety and oversees national and international training programs. Lorrie has 31 years of experience in the traffic safety field. As an advocate for child safety and injury prevention, Lorrie is a nationally certified child passenger safety instructor. She has consulted on numerous studies, published articles, and routinely participates as an expert panel member for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and other organizations. Joanne Ward-Cottrell has been employed as a health educator with WellSpan Health, an integrated healthcare delivery system in South Central Pennsylvania for 26 years. Her professional career began with an internship at the Maryland Kids in Safety Seats program in 1982. Joanne was instrumental in starting the Safe Kids York County Coalition, served as the coalition coordinator, and she now leads the coalition's child passenger safety activities. Our third speaker is Sergeant Wes Williams. Sergeant Williams is the lead supervisor for the Firearms Licensing Division and the Crime Prevention Unit for the York County, Pennsylvania Sheriff's Office. He has been a member of the Pennsylvania Crime Prevention Officers Association since March 2012 and has been a child passenger safety technician since October 2014. Sergeant Williams has been involved with the Countdown to Drive program since 2014. I thank you all for being with us today. And Lorrie, would you like to begin?
Sure, and thank you very much for having me and our other panelists today to talk about these kids that are between 8 and 14 as motor vehicle occupants. This is an interesting group, and they fall into a number of categories, and some of the discussion points that we're going to have today will show how this group is oftentimes underrepresented when it's time to do traffic safety information. So what's new with kids 8 to 14 in crashes? Well, as you can read on this slide, a steady decrease over the last 20 years has been reversed since 2014 and up to 2016, where we've seen an increase in the number of kids who've been involved in motor vehicle-related deaths. And so we need to figure out what's the problem with this, why is it happening, and what do we need to do in order to make sure that it doesn't continue. So what we use at Safe Kids is data that's collected through a rich variety of valid and trusted sources. Oftentimes we use NHTSA data, and that can sometimes differ from CDC numbers and from the National Safety Council. Everybody collects their data in different ways, and sometimes that makes it difficult when you're doing presentations and trying to come up with one number to represent a particular group. And so Safe Kids will conduct our own information through community resources and research programs, but it's not academic research to speak of. We rely on the larger organizations for the academic research, and we build our programs around their research, their findings, and trust their findings. It's served us well in the past. We're going to talk about some of the programs that we've come up with, our Safest Generation, and that was for kids 11 and 12. And we find our information to reach the families through Harris polls and focus groups with parents and kids. And we did that separately in 2 cities, Tallahassee and in St. Louis, so that we were able to figure out what's going on with a variety of kids in different locations as well as their parents. And then we developed our Countdown to Drive program that Sergeant Williams is going to talk about, and that was for our teen passengers. This is not a teen driver program, but rather a teen passenger program. And that we developed based on online national bulletin boards where there were conversations and communication going back and forth among people who had questions about their kids, a teen omnibus questionnaire, and then focus groups again with parents and kids separately. So we have a rich source of data. We also use the American Academy of Pediatrics, and we use child fatality review information from time to time as it relates to the topics that we're discussing. So one of the questions that came in beforehand was a question about children and alcohol crashes. And I've been able to obtain the 2016 data. One of the wonderful resources that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has is a document called Traffic Safety Facts, children, and every year that's updated with the latest statistics, and that is not yet published. I'm expecting it any day now, but I have the numbers from it. You just can't go on and download the document, or I would have put that as a resource for you here. But that document collects the information about children that are involved in alcohol-related crashes, as well as children who are restrained and unrestrained, and it pulls them out by different age groupings. So using the NHTSA data is very interesting and helps if you're doing presentations to one particular organization. Feel free to use that NHTSA data. But we did see that 17% of children were killed in alcohol-impaired driving crashes. And 54% of those kids were passengers in cars where their own driver was impaired, while 29% of kids were in other vehicles other than the one driven by their own parent, where there was an alcohol-impaired driver. We know that sober drivers make a big difference, and based on our NOPUS data, and that's the National Occupant Protection Use Survey from NHTSA, again, a survey that's done it's a probability-based survey on occupant restraints, we learned that when drivers are restrained, 30% of the times kids are unrestrained. But when drivers are unrestrained, 66% of the kids are unrestrained. So there's a direct correlation between driver restraint and the number of kids who are unrestrained. And we want to make sure when we're talking to kids and their parents that we're also making sure that every adult who's driving a child is sober and buckled and pays attention to the child occupants. One of the questions that I like to often ask at a presentation is for parents to stop and think about all the different drivers who transported their child in the last week. And oftentimes they haven't stopped to think about it, but it's relatives and it's their own family members who they hadn't considered. You know, maybe it was an incident where you didn't arrange it ahead of time, but it just happened spur of the moment. And really to ask the question, what do we know about these people as drivers? Are they as careful? And parents sometimes need to pay a little more attention, particularly for these kids 8 to 14 who would be uncomfortable asking the question or asking a driver to buckle up. So it's a good question to ask audiences. So if you look at this data, again, coming through NHTSA, and if we look at kids who were involved in fatal crashes in 2016, you will see a steady progression of unrestrained children as they age. And so it's particularly important when we look at the numbers of 14% at children under 1, all the way up to 44% for those kids who are 8 to 12, and then an incredible 59% the kids who are 13 and 14. And this is a particularly impressive time for kids because they're getting ready to be passengers in vehicles with teen drivers, and they're getting ready to be drivers themselves. And we don't want to interrupt the education and the habit that they may have formed as young children when they are capable of putting their own restraint on and being responsible for their own safety, no matter who's driving. And it's sort of unfortunate that here in the United States, where a booster seat can be purchased for as little as $10, seat belts are in every car at our standard issue. They're free. And the back seat, where there are seat belts for 3 seating positions, sometimes more if there's more than 1 row, offer great protection for kids who are too big for booster seats. And we have to get better at the messaging for parents that because the law stops at age 6 or 7 or 8 in their state, the law of physics is still in place. Whether they're in Utah, New York, or Mississippi, they still have to keep kids restrained. So here's a big challenge. And this is a question that comes up in every state where I do assessments for NHTSA and oftentimes other presentations. What's the age of a child? And oftentimes, even at one table when we're interviewing panelists, and they may all be police officers, one police officer is speaking as the person who does traffic control outside of an elementary school. So his focus may be on little kids. Other people may be involved with the teen driver. And some are thinking of their children at home. And so the age of a child differs. But the American Academy of Pediatrics in their Bright Futures handbook has, I think, one of the best breakdowns of child ages. And of course, there's the infant to 12 months. That's pretty easy. Early childhood, 1 to 4. Middle childhood. And they break it down because there's unique skills and unique criteria that are available for those kids that they've studied. And they are now making informed decisions when they have physicians talk to parents about anticipatory guidance. So 5 and 6, okay, there's some issues there, and they may be relatively similar, and usually still covered under a child passenger safety law. 7 and 8, maybe you'll have 7-year-olds who are covered under the law, but 8-year-olds who are not. 9 and 10 who may be covered under a seatbelt law, but maybe not. And then moving over into adolescence, 11 to 14, and they may fall under the adult seatbelt law. So is there a question about whether they ride in the front seat or the back seat? Is the state law requiring that? That's one thing that you'll want to consider as you're looking at programs in your own state. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there's a data set that can be different depending on who's collecting the data. So at age 8, and this is generally for physical characteristics, the height and weight may still require a booster seat based on best practices from the technical guide from the American Academy of Pediatrics that was issued in March of 2011. That still stands. In the safety in vehicles, you have to know your state law inside and out so that when parents ask questions, you can give them what the law may be, but then also best practices that may supersede what the law actually, at a minimum, requires. So the law may end or even before age 8, and the child would still be in a booster seat. They may still be required to be in a back seat. But remember that 44% number of kids 8 to 12 who used no restraint in 2016. The child at 8 still has a capacity for some independent thinking. They begin to recognize their own safety needs. They can answer questions. They are strong enough and smart enough to be able to put on their own seatbelt, but are they strong enough and capable enough to ask a peer or another driver, and they may not. They may still need their parent to do that for them. And in carpools, they may spend less time under the direct supervision of their parents. They're still highly influenced by their parents. Kids 9 and 10, physical characteristics, again, they vary in height and weight. And all of you know, if you line kids up who are 9 and 10, they can be very small to very tall. They can be very light to very heavy. And the peer pressure is on the parents now to ditch those booster seats. Joanne's going to talk more about that. I'm not going to go into great detail about that. But just know that the seat belts may not be comfortable or may not fit them, and yet they still have their own issues for not wanting to be more comfortable. Safety in the vehicles, they still may require that booster seat. They should still be in the back seat and buckled until age 13 as per the AAP. And again, they fall into that no restraint use, that 44% for the 8 to 12. They do have an increasing independent thinking capacity, but they still require adult supervision and guidance. And their peers and peer group, if it includes older kids, will likely tease them if they see high back boosters in a car. Oftentimes that's when parents will either remove them from the booster or switch to a different type of booster seat. 11 to 14, again, physical characteristics change. And now kids at 13, under 13, would still be in the back seat as recommended, but we begin to see more kids riding in the front at these ages. But remember that that splits in here at 13 and 14. They can be in the front seat. And in the front seat, they may have small stature. It's not part of their law. They may be required to use a booster seat by size, but peer pressure keeps them from doing it. And you'll notice the split numbers here again, 8 to 12, 44%, and now at 13, 14, you see a pretty hefty jump for those kids that were unrestrained in crashes in 2016. They do have a stronger capacity of coping and being able to solve problems without their parents in attendance, but the parent influence, while strong, is still not as strong and decreasing as the peer increases. And then 13, 14, here we go again with higher height and weight. Not really an issue because now the front seat has some extra benefits for those kids with the airbags, side impact protection, extra vehicle safety features that are in the front seat that are not in the back. And then they may have seatbelt use decreasing because it's not cool. They can still think independently, and their friends may help them make their decisions, and we need to help them choose the right thing and so they don't take increased risks. And parents still have influence, but the peers have more. So I'd like to take this time just to ask you, for you to take the poll for us and tell us what you think. The people that I'm most comfortable teaching about seatbelts are kids under 8, kids between 8 and 12, teens between 13 and 14, and parents. And as you can see, we have the majority of our group, 59%, let's see, what do we got? Oh, still counting. We're still seeing that parents, though, are our group that most of you are more comfortable addressing, that kids under 8 have a close second, and then those kids between 8 and 12, and the smallest number is kids between 13 and 14. And hopefully today we'll shed a little bit of light on some of the things you might be able to do to make that a little bit more comfortable for you. I think we're finished with the poll there, and we can move on to that next slide. Oops. Sorry about that. So one of the things I want to talk about is the state examples. Some of you had asked about different programs that are available out there. And one of the states I like to point to is Kansas. They've done a phenomenal job of dealing with kids who reach this 8 to 14 population through their Project SAFE program. And it's Project SAFE is seatbelts are for everyone. It was a program that started originally just in a few schools and then developed a really strong support measure from the state police, and it's now in 152 schools and institutionalized. It's not reliant on the car seat lady or the traffic safety guy coming in to do the presentation in one school, one time a year. This is now something that's been incorporated across the state in many of their schools, 152 of them in Kansas, 19 in Oklahoma, and 3 in Missouri, where this is a teen-run peer-to-peer program where they're doing their own seatbelt surveys. They're having older kids talk to younger kids, and it's based on positive rewards and enforcement. It's an evaluated program, and it's a really impressive program. You'll see the contact on there, and I think if you make contact with them, they'll be more than happy to share information about this program with you. So one of the things that I think is really important to focus on is our idea of good, better, best. And these are the kids that are in a vehicle, and many of us who work in the child passenger safety field are really hypercritical of parents who are really trying to do the best thing. And that counts for kids that are 8 all the way up through the time when they leave the family's home. And what we have to realize is that even if we've not started working with this group, we can start at the good spot, where if we can just get kids from these ages to be involved in sitting in the back seat, that's a good move. That helps kids stay safer and better. If we can get those kids in the back seat to be in a restraint, that's better yet. And if you'll notice, all of these kids now, they are a mess. They're all over the place. They've got car seats, they've got seat belts, they've got neck rolls, they're using lap belts, they're using lap shoulder belts and booster seats. They've got everything in this one vehicle. And by the way, this is not a staged photo. This came in one of our car seat inspections, and the family had waited in line for a while before they were called to the front for their inspection. These kids were out cold. So this is a picture of a family that's making every effort. And we're all on the way to best. We've been doing this 30-plus years in the United States, and we still have not very impressive unrestrained uses where we look in fatal crashes, and I think we all have work to do. So when we're talking to families, we don't want to be judgmental. We want to encourage them to make sure that their kids, number one, are using a restraint if it's required by law. B, that they're using the correct restraint, and that means if they've outgrown the booster seat, that they are now seated using the seat belt, hopefully in the back seat of the vehicle, and then that they are remembering the law of gravity, that no matter whose car they're in, even if the law doesn't require it, that every occupant, even the adults, are buckled, because we know there's a direct correlation between that adult seat belt use and the children who are restrained in the vehicle. So I think that ends my part at this point in time, and I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Joanne.
Thank you, Lorrie. It's interesting. I think in the introduction we talked about the fact that I've started my career with child passenger safety, and it was about 30-some years ago. And it's interesting that at that time we were dealing with a lot of grandparent bias. There were grandparents that just didn't think those infants should go home in car seats. The parents should have them on their lap. So good news, we've made great strides. But we are still dealing with that bias and misconceptions when it comes to that older group, to booster seats. So that's what we're going to talk about. That's what I'm going to talk about is how can we address those issues? How can we work together and collaboratively in our communities? And what I neglected to mention, and when I provided my information for my introduction, is that I'm also a technician and an instructor, a child passenger safety instructor, have been so for about 16 years. So I work with a number of folks in law enforcement and I've talked to a number of parents about child passenger safety over the years. So let's get started with that ages 8 to 12 group, that incredible What can be incredibly confusing is, what do I do? Should my child be in a booster seat? Should my child be using a seatbelt? What you see here are those best practice guidelines that Lorrie was talking about, and the guidelines on when a child really fits into the adult seatbelt. And it's important to really explain to people that that seatbelt was made for men. It was not made for young children. So really a child being able to meet all of these guidelines really is important. And regardless of the individual state laws, these guidelines that you see here on what makes for a fit, the little checklist, if you will, should always be the message that we share with children and with parents. And oftentimes parents come seeking, quite often they will seek advice from healthcare professionals, from law enforcement, quite often asking the question, does my child need to use a booster seat? And what's important to keep in mind is many times parents that are asking that question know the guidelines, have seen the checklist that you're looking at, but they are oftentimes looking for that authority figure, their family physician, police officer, to kind of give them permission not to use that booster seat. Because again, there's bias against it, there's confusion, and it really, sometimes parents just are looking for somebody to say, yes, you don't have to use a booster seat. So it really is important that we stick with the guidelines and be able to explain what those guidelines are. And as Lorrie mentioned, the AAP has specific guidelines for the 8 to 12 age group that children should be able to meet this checklist to properly be safely protected by the belt. And I'll be the first to say that within the healthcare system that I work for, quite often in the community I'm faced with parents saying, but my doctor, your doctor, the doctor that works for your health system, said it was okay for my 8-year-old to ditch the booster seat. And obviously I have to kind of take a step back and go through an explanation about booster seats and how they're safe. So, it's really important for those of us that are child passenger safety specialists within our individual communities to be careful that we are working with our healthcare systems and trying to make sure that we're making sure and helping physicians to understand, healthcare providers to understand. But to be perfectly honest, it's kind of tough. It's rough on physicians to keep up on all of the other medical, clinical issues that they have to deal with and give guidance in this age group where it's not a firm number or a firm age. It really does require for some more discussion to answer that question. So, I would really suggest that, we need to make it easier for healthcare providers if we're working with them in partnership, or if you're a healthcare provider, there are tools like these growth charts that have all of the information on it that's a nice visual prompt for parents coming into the practices. And we're in the process of distributing these kinds of growth charts within our health system. I will say that when parents ask the question, that question, I kind of fall back to the discussion that Lorrie was alluding to. So when a parent asks, does my child need a booster seat or can I use the seatbelt? And I know that, and because my child's 8 or my child's 9 and I'm just a little confused, I always go back to my response often kind of goes back to that, there's the state law and the law of physics, just what Lorrie was talking about. And get into a discussion that laws are what politicians can agree on. And, are we assuming that all children grow at the same rate? And then I go on to explain how booster seats really can protect children from injury by meeting that, by touching the child across nice firm spots across the lap and up on the shoulders. And even children, because the little 8-year-olds or 9-year-olds kind of look at me like, please, lady, say that I don't need a booster seat. When you start talking about, are all kids at age 8 the same height? They kind of look at you like, of course not. And that's it really is important to open that dialogue and to help explain the difference between, or why we have laws and why we have those best practices, and encourage people to follow those best practices. It's not always easy. It's not a real quick answer, but it really is important to help explain those issues. The other, and so part of the issue, as I mentioned, is that parental bias. that oftentimes parents have their own beliefs, their own attitudes. Oftentimes a lot of it stems from the fact that, well, who wants to think they're going to be in a car crash? If there's a lot of denial, we don't think about it. Who would want to? We know that there's also some confusion about how a booster seat helps. I forget how many years ago, a while back, the state of Washington, folks there conducted did a lot of research and looked at parents' attitudes, and a lot of them just thought, well, how can this little flimsy thing really help? What's the difference between using it and using the seatbelt? Because they had transferred from all of the skills and needed to install a car seat and making that very snug to a booster seat that just kind of sits there. So part of that transition to a booster seat and parents really not understanding what it's for and how it works helps to fuel some of the bias that, why bother? My kid will be fine using the seatbelt. So again, the parental bias, we need to keep that in mind. Bottom line, adults don't like to be told what to do. A lot of kids don't like to be told what to do. And we merely need to be able to explain things a little better. And sometimes an explanation isn't quite enough. So we need to take advice from advertisers. And for quite some time, advertisers have used a little bit of a threat appeal approach. If you think of some of the commercials you've seen on TV where they're selling items related to medical issues, the idea is to make an issue, the threat, very graphic or very compelling. And if you can follow that with an easy fix, it's easier to sell a product, or in this case, really create change. And that's exactly what the folks from a project out of Eastern Virginia Medical School have done with the example that I've provided here. I just recently fell upon this website and the video. I personally love it. I'm very much a straight talk, tell it like it is kind of person. You'll see from some other examples. And this helps to do that. It shows an example. It's a portrayal of a 9-year-old and mom going to a soccer tournament. The 9-year-old is only in the seatbelt, and they're in a crash. So then there's the discussion, ensues at the emergency room about the benefits of the booster seat versus just the seatbelt alone. If you visit that website, you'll see that there are free downloads. Great for social media because, again, it's hard to engage people in just, in educational programs, but we can get them on Facebook. We can, they go to websites and so forth. In York County, we're going to be reaching out to our law enforcement and sharing this link and this website and encouraging them to add it to their Facebook pages. So really kind of, hitting home and telling it like it is and explaining what can happen in a crash is really important with parents. The other bias is the kids themselves. We've all, if any of us that have had kids in this age group, we've heard it. I'm not a baby. I don't need a car seat. And, they view the booster seat as a car seat. The good news is there's a new solution. There's a new product that is different. So for those kids that really can't don't want to buy into that booster seat feel, there's a new thing called MyFold. You can Google MyFold. You'll find a website for it. You'll find lots of YouTubes on how to use it. It really helps those parents that are dealing with the hassle of their child not wanting to work with them. It's also great for children who are using other vehicles. They're carpooling. And quite frankly, I wouldn't even call it a booster seat. I'd say, look, there's a really cool new gadget we have that adjusts that grown-up seatbelt to fit you. Let's not call it a booster seat. I really encourage you to check out the website. I know here locally, we've been talking to parents about booster seats, explaining this new option has really been helpful. The other part of, again, telling it like it is we need to be careful that we reframe our messages. If you look at the AAP guidelines, we have things like, telling kids they need to be on the booster seat or seatbelts to reduce injury in the crash. Quite frankly, what do kids hear when they hear that? It's kind of like that Charlie Brown moment of wah, 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 wah. Just reducing injuries doesn't mean anything. What kinds of injuries? So tell it like it is for that booster seat age child. Explain what can happen to their bellies. And for all kids, they understand their brains. They understand they need to protect those. So tell them what can happen if they have a concussion, what can happen if in a serious injury, and just really tell it like it is. and we need to be able to be honest with them. For those parents who really are bought in, though, let's support them. We need to remind them. We need to remind them the rules of the vehicle. We want them to be teaching the kids those rules, because those are the rules that we want the kids to use when they're the driver. So just as Lorrie talked about, we need to be thinking of the driver to be. We also need to empower those parents, and Wes is going to talk a little bit more about this, a lot more about this in our Countdown to Drive program. But parents also need to feel comfortable sharing their expectations with their family and with carpool drivers. What do they expect? And from the kids, this is what I expect from you. One of the Safe Kids research studies fairly recently, looked at parents just assume that kids, because they use the seatbelt in their car, are doing that with other folks and other cars. And that's not necessarily the case. We have to, as parents, always be sharing our expectations. We're not the only influencers, but our voice needs to be heard. The other thing that has been very useful is those pre-drivers, those 13 to 14-year-olds, is setting that contract. And as I mentioned, Sergeant Williams will talk about that, the Countdown to program, very specifically. So where do we deliver the messages? In a variety of settings. But the messages, we have to weave it in. Parents don't want to really talk about seatbelts. They know about seatbelts. They've been using seatbelts forever. So kind of weave it into what you're doing. Look at partners that can weave it into what they're doing. We like the pull-up that you see in these photos. We kind of take it to different events when we're invited to them, or, it's from a healthcare perspective. If I'm asked to be at a Community First Friday event, I just bring it along. Parents don't necessarily ask questions, but it's very interesting to see them stepping back and reading and thinking about, what do I need to do as my child, and should I put my child back on a booster seat? The other thing I would encourage is let's think outside the box. Kudos to the folks in New York. I'm not the only one, obviously, that really relates booster or seatbelt use to keeping the brain safe. The folks here in New York, the state of New York, did so. This label that was meant to go on a watermelon and ended up on a watermelon in a Walmart in New York County. My coworker brought it in to share it with me, which really is stemming some. I'm really curious what we can do in New York County with some of our partners. But think outside the box. How can we get that message out there? And who can we partner with? So who in your community can you partner with? It's going to be different from in every community, and they may be different partners. When it comes to that sticker, maybe there's something we can do with our Buy Fresh Buy Local partners. I happen to be on the board for our local Buy Fresh Buy Local chapter. So who are your key community partners, and who are some unusual partners that may help in getting that tough message across about seatbelts? If you are not working with a child passenger safety technician, you can find one near you at the website that I have listed here, and clicking on that Find a Tech. And if you're not involved in a Safe Kids Coalition, we obviously encourage you to do so. Here, the website is one that you can also find the Safe Kids location closest to you. So it's through that coalition, again, that really oftentimes partnerships can evolve, unusual partners, and people that all come together. All the people that come together in a Safe Kids Coalition are there because they care about kids. And they bring different, they have different connections that really can help you in the job that you're doing, and in trying to reach groups that you may not, that don't always come to us, but how do we go to them? So what I'd like to do then is kind of pass things off to Sergeant Williams and let him talk about the experience we've had in New York County with the Countdown to Drive program.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. As previously stated, my name is Sergeant Williams. I am with the York County Sheriff's Office here in York, Pennsylvania. And I want to throw this disclaimer out that this isn't really nothing that I've designed. There was a young lady by the name of Adrienne Burgess. She had the foresight to try to get those partnerships that Joanne had talked about earlier with the national-wide Countdown to Drive. And quite honestly, Adrienne was the spearhead and the driving force and behind this. And again, as Joanne talked about, we're talking about some of your local partnerships. In this case here, and I'm speaking specifically of York County, and this is something that you could do in your local communities, get the local sheriffs or police departments involved. If you have personnel who are trained in this sort of thing, and most of them should be crime prevention officers, I'm sure they'd be more than willing to assist your organization. The insurance agents, that's something kind of unique, and I'm really glad that Adrian, again, had the foresight to bring that out. And you're going to see during my presentation where it can be a very useful tool for those pre-drivers or those teen passengers that we've talked about. Some of the people that you really want to get involved with in the schools for your presentation would be your school nurses, physical education, or health teachers. And the reason why you really want to do that is because they're your in. Quite often it's very difficult to go through the local school administrations, through the superintendent's offices, to try to get your 15 minutes of fame. But these folks are very instrumental in getting your foot in the door, and you should really, really attempt to tap into those assets to get you in and get these presentations going. They're like I said, they're very instrumental in doing so. The PowerPoint or the design or the implementation for the Countdown to Drive, it is in a PowerPoint format. Again, that's something that Adrian designed locally. Now, we do have a video and PowerPoint format for Survival 101. That's really where I come into play as the local law enforcement officer. Survival 101 is actually a program that was designed by Buckle Up, or PA Buckle Up. You may or may not have something similar to this program in your area. If you would like some information on how to obtain it, you can always email me. My information is at the end of the presentation, and I can always give you that information or at least lead you in the right direction. And I'll speak specifically of Survival 101 in a moment. And then the interactive was with the insurance partner, a gentleman here locally by the name of Steve Horning, who is an Allstate representative. So we get these folks into and when I say folks, I mean both the teen driver or the teen passengers and the pre-drivers, along with their parents, and we give them the PowerPoint presentation as far as the Countdown to Drive goes. And then we would interrupt with some laws, specifically that to the Commonwealth is what I speak to. And then we would have Mr. Horning wrap it up at the end prior to the contracts. So again, this is just the way, this is a vehicle that we use to actually give or present our program. And again, most of you may know, hopefully you do, this is Countdown to Drive is a web-based parent-teen passenger agreement. It really opens up those lines of communication between parents and child. What are my expectations of you, both from parents and from children, quite honestly. And it starts building the trust and respect that Joanne kind of talked about earlier as well. And what was really interesting to me is when not Joanne, but when Adrian and I went to our first event together, we were standing out in the parking lot in front of the school, kind of discussing the plan or the itinerary for the day. And we had 3 parents pull up with their children in their atypical minivans. And it was interesting to note that all 3 parents were not wearing their seatbelts, nor were their children. And that's definitely leadership by example. But back to the Countdown to Drive, you know, you're going to see how we incorporated the contract and, more importantly, Steve Horning, where that trust and respect needs to come into play. Because quite honestly, driving a vehicle is very, very expensive. And you're going to need your parents to drive, and your parents are going to need your trust in order to do that. And we do talk about the rules for Countdown to Drive. There's 5 established rules, mandatory seatbelt usage, and again, children can expect that from their parents as well. Refrain from any type of distracting behavior, people using phones, music, and the like. The first thing teenagers will do when they get in their car is turn up the radio, and we're trying to teach them not to avoid that type of behavior. And then obviously the three, what we call the no-brainers, are the impaired drivers, inexperienced drivers, and unsafe drivers. And we even talk to the children about, what do you do if you are with one of these drivers and you don't realize it until it becomes to a point where you're feeling uncomfortable. We assure them that you can get out of the car and begin to walk home if it's safe to do so. And because most of our children have cell phones. And we stress the fact that most parents would prefer that you get out of that vehicle and call them, and they would come get you. That way, at least you're safe. And again, that's building the trust. Hey, Mom, Dad, I'm doing the right thing, and you can trust me to do the right thing. So again, we talk about that as well. And then with everything else, establishing rewards and consequences. This is what you're going to get if you adhere to the rules, or this is what's going to be taken from you if you don't. And again, those rewards and those contracts or consequences are per contract. That's part of the Countdown to Drive initiative. So, and you'll see that here in just a moment. This is how you get on. This is www.countdowntodrive.org. Again, this is not something that I designed. This is something that is Safe Kids. And you can go on. Now, quite often, they actually have an event number that the facilitator will use, and that's something that you would be able to coordinate as well through the website. And it's very simple. Teams will get on, and they can do their part of the contract. And once they log in and they feel that they're satisfied with how they've got their contract, they can email their parents. And then the parents, once they get that notification, they can log on, and then they can kind of get a mediation in between the contracts and then come up with some type of an agreement. This is what it looks like when you go in. And again, they will need to know your parents' email. So that way, when they complete the application or the contract, they can go ahead and notify their parents, and the parents can log on, and then they can solidify everything, all their agreements. And these are, again, some of the rules. I need to know where you're at. If I don't know where you're at, then you're not going to be able to, go to the school dance or whatever the case may be. These are who you are and are not allowed to drive with. If I find you with somebody who you're not allowed to drive with, again, there's going to be consequences as well. But if I keep seeing that you're riding with the people that we've agreed to, then there's going to be rewards as well. And, it's amazing how parents know what their children do when their children don't think that they do know. They think that we have those proverbial eyes in the back of our head, and it's amazing to them how we can see things that they never thought was possible. But this is a good way, again, to have a check and balance for that. Again, the Survival 101, that was designed, again, by Buckle Up, Pennsylvania. What this does here, we have a video at the beginning. It's both video and with audio of a real 911 call about some young teenage girls involved in an accident on their way to school, and then it shows their parents getting the phone call from the local law enforcement that their child has died. And it's very impactful when these young teens see that, because again, and it's something that Joanne talked about with the bias. Oh, it's never going to happen to me, and it's just down the road. And then when they see some things like this, it becomes very, very impactful. We do emphasize those critical messages, again, through Survival 101 about the seatbelt usage, distracted driving. We talk about fatigue driving and things of that nature as well. And it gives these guys really something to think about that they never thought about before because of their age group. Now, in the crash dynamics, we talk about the three types of collision, the outside of the vehicle, and most people don't think or even know that there are three types of collision. And we explain to them that the outside of the vehicle is that car hitting a tree or a guardrail or another vehicle. Those are the collisions that occur outside of the vehicle. Then we talk about the collisions that occur inside of the vehicle. For instance, if you're not seat belted in, it's your, it's your rib cage or your breastplate hitting the steering wheel. It's your forehead hitting the glass. It's that book of CDs that you have that weighs about 10 pounds coming up and hitting you with the force of an accelerated object in the back of the head. Again, those are all collisions that occur inside the vehicle. You and your friend colliding together because neither one of you are seatbelted in, and things of that nature. And then we also talk about the internal or the human collisions. When we make the analogy of the car hitting a tree, and that tree, or I'm sorry, when that car was going 60 miles an hour, once it hits that tree, the car stops. But inside that vehicle, your body is still going 60 miles an hour. And so when your forehead hits a windshield, your forehead is hitting the windshield at 60 miles an hour. And once that force is stopped because of the windshield, you have the internal or the human collision where your brain is now hitting your skull at 60 miles an hour. So we talk about things like that so they understand that you hitting a tree isn't just your car getting damaged. There's other ripple effects to that. And the various crime scene or accident scene photos, the graphicness of them really depend on the age group that we are targeting. We have a school program for middle school and for high school as well. And then there's another, I would recommend anybody to look at this Simple Plan video. It's called How It Can Happen to Me. It shows about a young girl dying in a DUI crash and how her entire family is affected by that. And then lastly, we wrap it up with the insurance partnership, and your local insurance agent can talk about buying a car. How much does it cost to buy a car? What is the car maintenance? How much does it cost for tires? How much does it cost for windshield wipers and things of that nature? Then obviously the gas and the insurance. And that goes back to the building the trust and having that relationship with your parents. You need their parents' money, or they need their parents' money in order to be able to have that freedom or that independence with the vehicle. And likewise, if you are not holding up your end of the bargain with the contract, more than likely the parents are going to take that money from you. And then again, that goes part of the consequences. Now you can't drive your vehicle. So I think with Adrian having the foresight to bring local law enforcement into the mix and a local insurance agent into the mix really adds some more validity to the program, because again, it's just not somebody who's not the subject matter expert standing there speaking. When you have a law enforcement officer in full uniform and we're telling you these are the laws, they tend to sink in a little bit more. And when you have an insurance agent saying specifically, this is how much your parents are going to pay for you to drive, again, I think it highlights the need for their parent support. And that's really all I have. I appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, please, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lorrie, Joanne, and Sergeant Williams. Fabulous presentations. I want to remind all of our participants that if you have any questions for any of the presenters, please go ahead and type those into the Q&A box that you see to the left of your screen down at the bottom. You'll see the little box, and then hit the bubble and we will receive your question. So thank you so much. So let's go ahead and get started. We have a few minutes for questions, and yes, and here on the screen you'll see the email addresses for each of the presenters, and if you have a question that we don't get to today, you can follow up with one of them. Oops, excuse me. Okay, so let's start with Joanne. There were a number of requests for the graphic that you showed with the, looks like the growth charts. Are those available?
That's for purchase from, those are pieces that from I'm Safe. And I don't have the website for I'm Safe. I don't know if we can get it. But I'm Safe is a company that oftentimes, and Lorrie, I'm not sure if there's a link on the Safe Kids website for them. They have a number of educational resources, and that's one that we happen to use quite frequently.
Okay, great. Well, maybe we'll take a look at that and see if we can share that with everybody. All right. So there's a question for Sergeant Williams, and I will read the questions and then ask you, Sergeant Williams, to unmute your phone and respond. So the question is the Countdown to Drive program presented to only students or parents and students? And is it in school or after school? And what's your average number of participants?
I was actually typing an answer back to that. That's a great question. Typically, the way we do it is we have both the parents and the child present at the same class, if you will. That way, there's not a he said, she said, no, you're supposed to do this. No, that's not what I understood. And quite often, at the end of the presentation, we have time available where the parents and the child can actually begin working on their contract, so it just expedites the process once they go online. So it is presented to them simultaneously, and typically it's done after school hours. We try to do it just after dinner time so that the families can eat their dinner and then come. And we hold our average time that we take to present the class is about an hour. That way they're not getting home too late. And the really average number of participants really depends on the time of year. Summer times, children are more accessible than during the school year. But typically, we have on average about 20 families that attend each session.
Great. Thank you so much. And let me follow up with one more question for you, Sergeant Williams, while your line is unmuted. One of our participants notes that they are struggling to get local law enforcement involved in their occupant protection program. Do you have any suggestions?
That's hard to say. It's easy for me because I work for an elected official, but most of our municipalities, their chiefs of police are appointed. If you can read into that statement. But really, I think it comes down to the squeaky wheel. If you show a need and you can articulate why it's a good thing, I think most of your chiefs of police and your sheriffs would be willing to do that. Now, fortunately for our office, that's what I get paid to do as the lead supervisor for the crime prevention unit. That's what I do. I go out and I do outreach programs. I teach stranger danger, gun safety, and things like that. So we have the luxury of having somebody in that capacity already. Maybe just beg, borrow, and steal and plead as much as you can. And I think that maybe that would work.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So Joanne and or Lorrie, how do you advise children to proceed when the driver who is driving while intoxicated is a parent? It's a very sensitive situation. Do you have, but a very risky one. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, Safe Kids did some research not too long ago. It's on our website. There's some information on there. One of our research reports where I think about 31% of kids did say that they were afraid when they're riding with their parents. And so what we try to do, again, the child oftentimes doesn't have a full range of options at the time, but if they know that there's a problem, getting into the back seat, buckling up, making sure that you have a discussion, a rational discussion, much like you do with Countdown to Drive when it's not in the heat of the moment or at the time when there's a problem. You're doing it when it's rational. We did find that kids are sometimes afraid in their parents' or relatives' vehicles. And that's a question that is really very challenging. You oftentimes want to have the child have a secondary person that they can call or contact or have a secret word with that they can use when they are contacting them and asking for additional support. And it's risky, it's challenging, but kids need to know that if there's anything that they can do, it might just be to climb into the back seat and buckle up, and that may be their only option at that point in time. But you know, there's no one answer. I mean, you can't necessarily stop the car because you're not driving. But it is touchy,
Right.
and unfortunately, it's the one thing that we can't predict. But we have done some research to find out that it's not just teen drivers that scare the heck out of kids. It's sometimes their own relatives.
Great. So unfortunately, we are at the top of the hour. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we will conclude. This question for any of our presenters is, parents say that they are disconnecting the airbag, so their 10-year-old is now safe in the front seat. What information can we give them? Anybody have a response to that?
Well, I can tell you that the parents typically cannot disconnect that without official written approval from NHTSA. There's a whole process that they have to go through, and it has ramifications beyond the owner of that vehicle when the car is resold. Unfortunately, there's no law that requires people to replenish an airbag after a crash, but it's a very foolish thing to do. And I guess you were saying that they've deactivated. I'm not sure how you do that in today's vehicles that have an automated on-off, where the weight of the occupant determines whether there's a seatbelt, whether the airbags are in use for that front seat occupant. But in some of the older vehicles, there is a button or a key that you can turn that does turn off the airbag. It's risky. It doesn't make good sense, and we would advise against it.
Right.
Great.
And the other thing is that the seatbelt and the airbag work together.
Excellent. Thank you all, Lorrie Walker, Joanne Ward-Cottrell, and Sergeant Wesley Williams. Thank you for a fabulous presentation. So much great advice, practical information. We really appreciate your time. And to all of our participants who joined us today, thank you for your time. We hope this was useful to you. We'd like to ask that you take just a moment to click on the link to our short evaluation, and that would be very helpful to get some feedback from you. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and bye-bye, everyone.